electoral politics are playing out. And there's a question as to whether we are really receiving the representation that we wish to have, because elections are dominated by money and various other factors, and so there is an issue as to whether we are getting the representation that we really truly deserve. And then, of course, as again you pointed out, elections are becoming such a polarizing factor. In fact, if you look at this trajectory of history I was talking about in Sri Lanka, people were divided mainly for electoral politics. We know that. I mean, if you go back to 56 politics, and even before that, you see how what seemingly appeared to be democratic politics divided us ethnically, and now you see the religious factor coming in, mainly for electoral gain. So these are the contradictions that we've seen, and we are just wondering then what is the alternative to democracy? Should we be thinking about an alternative to democracy now? Or is it that we should start rethinking democracy and reformulate democracy, reform democracy, so that we can achieve what we want, our liberties, our freedoms, a way of life that we all enjoy. After all, as the Declaration of Independence says, it's also about the pursuit of happiness. Politics should be about the pursuit of happiness as well. What are our expected goals? What are the principles that we believe in terms of what we think ought to be democracy? I think, many societies are going through this crisis because we are going through, for a long time we've been focusing a lot on the trappings of democracy. The trappings of democracy and not so much the substance of democracy. And that is the crisis, I think. We are not thinking about the value base of democracy, but we are thinking in terms of political parties and political leaders and institutions and so on, but not so much the values. So I think it's time for us to really ask ourselves whether we believe in the values which we are told liberal democracy ought to represent. Do we really believe in the autonomous individual? Do we believe that for human rights for all? We all, I think, my experience is that everybody wants their own human rights, but there's an issue as to whether we believe in human rights for the others and human rights for all. Do we believe in the rule of law? When I teach law in my university and I start talking about, for example, freedom from torture, you do find there's so much of support for torture. There is. That's a fact. The police keep referring to that. They say, even middle-class educated people find that, they say torture is necessary to do good policing. So what is our value base? Do we believe in checks and balances? Often I'm told, Professor, this is about academics, checks and balances. You talk about these principles, it's academic. And I tell them it's not academic, it's about life. We all want institutions that represent us. We want an independent judiciary. We want independent institutions to take our troubles to. When our rights are violated, we need to have places to go to that will look after us, that will protect us. That's about checks and balances. It's not academic. Do we pay a lot of attention to civic participation? Do we talk about citizenship, democratic citizenship? Do we? And I just also wonder where our value base for democracy comes from. This may sound simplistic, but I think a democracy cannot be sustained without an education system that is also democratic. You simply can't. I think a successful democracy ought to have an education system and everything else, a media and so on, that is steeped in democratic values and so on. Because, it's about the ethos, it's about the value base. So where does this come from? And when you go visit certain countries, which we would say relatively are deep democracies, you see how much the education system has invested in creating that democratic value base, that democratic ethos. So for us in Sri Lanka, we, I think, have quite an undemocratic education system where we are not really encouraged to be free people, free thinkers, free citizens, who are also, taught about democratic governance, the citizenship and so on, and they're supposed to be very successful, advocates for democracy. I don't think that happens. Let's face it, all of us come from a segregated school system. We don't even know each other. When I talk to my students, they sit together, Muslim students together. I'm sure Shamala has the same, I'm sure all our academics here have the same experience. Tamil students together, Sinhala students together. I even find Sinhala Catholic students sit together. Like that we are so marginalized. We are so compartmentalized in our lives. And when you ask them, before coming to the university, have you met with, youngsters of your age from other communities? Many shake their heads. The Asian shake, no. We don't. We have not. It's in the university that we, get this exposure to life with other communities. So I think we really need to get back to the basics. Because most of the time when we talk about democracy today, we are talking about elections. And democracy is limited to electoral politics. So we spend a lot of time talking about political personalities, what ex-politician thinks, what Y-politician thinks. We are not talking about politics of the people. We are talking about elite politics. So this, I think, is a huge mistake that we are making. So I think we really do need to get back. How do we create recognition of pluralism? Say this is that, because we live such compartmentalized lives from childhood in this country, we tend to look at democracy and democratic principles also in that compartmentalized way. So it's extremely difficult to have a whole picture of pluralism, a pluralistic society. For many, it's very, very difficult, however much you even try. So I've seen in my life as an adult, in my work, in my life, how difficult it is to secure this support, this sympathy for a pluralistic society. It's very, very difficult. And I must also say, I'm sorry if you misunderstand me, but I'm a straight talker. I need to say this. We also, for purposes of championing our causes, our rights, we also instrumentalize democratic values and norms. So I find, for example, human rights are very strongly instrumentalized. I had that experience in the Human Rights Commission. And I used to constantly say, you come before the commission to seek your rights. But do you really believe in other people's rights? So everybody fights for my people's rights. My people's rights, my people. And I tell them, for us, everybody's people. No matter who they are, what their ethnicity is, what the religion is, what gender they are from, what the sexual orientation is, people are people. Human rights are about people. So when you come and tell us about my people's rights, yes, everybody must be protected, but it is sad if you're only thinking about your, small sectarian rights. So this has to be said, because it's very distressing how much ethno-nationalism and religious nationalism has taken root. And when I think of the ruling ideology in Sri Lanka, and I think in many countries in the world, what comes to the fore are not the traditional political ideologies, theoretical political ideologies, but mainly I think it's really about ethno-nationalism. It's about racial superiority, etc. And the irony is that we are using democratic elections, we are using democratic processes to enthrone this sectarianism. This is the irony. So I think it's because it's our inability to really envision society that includes everybody. So you will find people who are fighting for their community's liberation, but don't think about gender, for example. Or don't think about minorities within one's community. So I have told many times over, many have misunderstood me when I've said, I'm sorry, a true human rights advocate, and I think that's what Rajni really represents, a true human rights advocate represents everybody. Because you understand the human condition, your thinking is not compartmentalized by ethnicity or religion. And I eschew ethno-nationalism of all types, religious nationalism of all types. I think it's very important for us to really think about this, because has ethno-nationalism of any type, majoritarian or otherwise, brought us liberation? I'm just wondering. So, we really do need to pay attention to that and not use concepts such as human rights and democracy in a cynical, instrumentalized manner. How democracy can ensure economic equality. This is absolutely essential. We hardly talk about poverty and economic inequality when we speak about human rights. And Sri Lanka still has, I think, not a difficult, but I think quite a long way to go to recognize, for example, economic and social rights as full rights, to bring it into the center of our political debates. We really do need to have a democratic framework that recognizes that, to focus on economic deprivation as a serious violation of human rights, and poverty as one of the most, if not the most serious violation of human rights that brings about other violations. And then finally, I think it's very important for us to also think about structural changes, certainly the electoral system. I mean, you think of the state, it's so important for the state to be organized in a manner that people's sovereignty doesn't work from top to bottom, but works from bottom to up. That we are in a position to enjoy our sovereignty at the local level and upwards. I think that is absolutely important for all communities. Absolutely. But particularly you see that it's important for minority communities, but for everybody to participate in governance. This is very important. And I think this is something I'm researching right now, how important it is to recognize intra-party democracy as a constitutional principle. We are not getting the representation we deserve. One of the reasons we don't have intra-party democracy. In many countries, within parties, we are not talking about democracy within parties. So families dominate, or certain types of class, social class would dominate, or a class orientation would dominate, etc. And one of the biggest complaints we get from youth when we work with youth is that they do not have opportunities because these groups are monopolizing and they cannot break through into politics, even if it is youth politics. So I think we really do need to focus on intra-party democracy. It goes to, really, I think the lack of intra-party democracy goes to sometimes very, it's, I'm searching for a word, it's tragic. Sometimes it's like a comedy, but it's tragic comedy, when you think of how people hang on and just don't let go. You just do need to have constant turnover of leadership so that people have a better choice. And so this is the question of getting through representation. So one is intra-party democracy, the other is the electoral system. How do we design electoral systems that don't depend on factors such as money, where you can dominate because of your social relationships, caste, for example, etc. So how do we change the politics in that manner? That's absolutely essential. So these are a few markers that I thought I'll highlight when we are discussing this very, so it's such an important issue such as framing democracy for our times. And I think finally we need to ask ourselves, are we satisfied with qualified democracy? Are we satisfied with incomplete democracy? Somebody told, somebody who studied, a Colombian scholar who studied the 1978 Constitution, he said in Parliament, no less, where when there was a discussion in Parliament over the constitutional reforms that were thought of during the previous regime, he said, you know, I went through your constitution of 1978, and this, he said, is a work which reflects incomplete liberalism. It's incomplete liberalism. So I think we also have learned over the years to be happy with incomplete democracy. So how do we dream of complete democracy, at least the thought of getting to complete democracy? I think these are the challenges that we face. So thank you very much once again for the opportunity. I thank Sumati Dayapala for the